For a moment, forget the headlines you've seen today, because what unfolded quietly behind closed doors may reshape how power, politics, and media influence collide in North America. Just minutes after a highly sensitive report surfaced on Canadian television, officials in Washington realized something had gone wrong. Not because the report was inaccurate, not because it lacked evidence, but because it aired at all. This was not supposed to happen. A document linked to alleged abuses inside El Salvador's high-security CECOT prison, previously restricted from broadcast, suddenly appeared on Canadian screens. Within hours, the story ignited controversy across borders, raising uncomfortable questions about censorship, press freedom, and political pressure at the highest levels. And once the dust settled, one name dominated the discussion: Donald Trump. But here's where the story becomes far more complex. The report did not originate from partisan activism. It did not rely on anonymous social media leaks. Instead, it followed a trail that led through journalists, policy analysts, and legal observers, many of whom had been tracking conditions inside CECOT for months. CECOT, or the Terrorism Confinement Center, has long been portrayed as a symbol of order and security by its supporters, but critics argue that behind the concrete walls lies a system operating with minimal transparency and almost no external oversight. The leaked material alleged harsh detention practices, prolonged isolation, and treatment that international watchdogs say could meet the threshold of torture under global human rights law. So why was Canada able to air it? The answer lies in the quiet but powerful differences between American and Canadian media regulation. In the United States, certain materials tied to national security or diplomatic sensitivity often face intense scrutiny before broadcast. Networks can be pressured directly or indirectly to delay or soften coverage. In Canada, however, broadcasters operate under a framework that places stronger emphasis on editorial independence, even when stories are politically inconvenient. That gap created an opening. Once the report reached Canadian journalists, the legal barriers that had slowed its spread elsewhere no longer applied. The broadcast went live, and within minutes, the ripple effects crossed borders. What followed was swift. Political commentators aligned with Trump criticized the report as misleading and politically motivated. Supporters dismissed it as foreign interference. Meanwhile, civil liberties groups argued that the reaction itself proved the report's importance. But perhaps the most revealing response came not from politicians, but from the media ecosystem itself. Several U.S.-based outlets noticeably avoided the story in its early hours. Others mentioned it briefly, stripped of context. That silence only fueled speculation. Why avoid a report already circulating internationally? George Conway, a prominent conservative critic of Trump, weighed in shortly after. He framed the situation not as a partisan attack, but as a test of democratic resilience. When information becomes uncomfortable, Conway argued, the instinct to suppress it often exposes deeper weaknesses. And that's where this story shifts from a single report to a systemic issue. Because censorship today doesn't always look like bans or blackouts. It often appears as hesitation, editorial caution, strategic omission. In other words, what doesn't get covered can matter more than what does. The Canadian broadcast forced that reality into the open. By airing the report, Canadian media didn't just share information, they challenged an unspoken norm about who gets to control political narratives across borders. And that challenge didn't sit well with everyone. In political circles, questions emerged about diplomatic fallout. Could this strain U.S.-Canada relations? Would future intelligence sharing be affected? Or would the story quietly fade once the news cycle moved on? History suggests something else. When stories touch on power, prisons, and accountability, they rarely disappear completely. They resurface, sometimes years later, when context changes and public attention returns. What makes this moment especially significant is timing. The report surfaced amid renewed debate over executive authority, law enforcement power, and the limits of state control. In that environment, even a single broadcast can tip the balance of public perception. And perception, as we know, shapes politics. For Trump's supporters, the controversy reinforces long-held beliefs about hostile media and international bias. For critics, it validates concerns about secrecy and authoritarian tendencies. But for undecided viewers, the ones watching quietly, the question is simpler. If this report hadn't aired in Canada, would they have ever known it existed? That question should linger, because democracy doesn't fail all at once. It erodes gradually when stories are softened, delayed, or quietly buried in the name of stability. Canada's decision to air the report disrupted that process, if only briefly. And that disruption may be the most important part of the story. As analysts continue to dissect the fallout, one thing is clear: information no longer respects borders the way governments wish it would. In a digital world, control is fragile, silence is temporary, and once a story is out, it cannot be put back. So the real issue isn't whether the report embarrasses powerful figures, it's whether societies are willing to confront uncomfortable truths when they surface, or whether they look away. Because today it was a prison report, tomorrow it could be far bigger, and when that moment comes, the question won't be who leaked it, but who dared to show it.